on the run and come up with things is one of the things that creativity is all about. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is creativity in the arts. Presenting the gospel through the arts is the main topic. So what, in you guys' personal classification, how would you define art? Just anybody.
Painting.
Painting? Okay.
Drawing.
Expressing through something.
Expressing through like a medium of various different kinds of mediums?
Creativity.
Creativity, okay.
Imagination.
Using your imagination. So those are all forms of art. Art is a kind of like communication, where you're communicating things with people that maybe you can't put into simple words, right? Like, have you ever seen a painting that evokes emotions in you? Yes? No?
Yeah.
How about music?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely music. Even music without words can make you think a certain thing.
Right.
Okay. What would you say? Ragtime? Wongi, you said ragtime?
What?
What'd you say? Oh, okay. The Russian author Tolstoy offers an example. Let me make this larger. My old eyes are getting weak here. Offers an example of what art is. He said that a boy that has experienced fear after an encounter with a wolf later relates that experience, infecting the hearers and compelling them to feel the same fear that he had experienced. That is a perfect example of a work of art. To be able to take a story and express your feelings through someone else's body. To get that other person to feel the same thing you felt, or see the same thing you saw, or something similar to it, without them having actually experienced the same thing. I mean, that's pretty much what we do when we listen to music. None of you guys in this section, I'm assuming, have been married or been in a serious relationship that lasted more than a couple of years, because, well, you're not old enough to have done that yet. Unlike ourselves, who experience would tell you. Now, if Dave here was to write a song, a love song about his wife, and be able to, really express himself and show his love for it, if he does it right, when you guys listen to it, you'll feel something very similar to what he feels for his wife. Hopefully you don't feel it directly for his wife, because then he'd have to beat you up. But you get the point here. Art is a type of communication. It's a type of getting your information out there in a clear, focused, and sincere way. We have painting was mentioned, singing, music. What are some other kinds of art that exist out there? Poetry. Poetry is a type of art, linguistic art.
Drawing.
Drawing. What else?
Acting.
Book, writing full-length books, acting. Sculpting. Sculpting is a very good one. I tried to, any of you guys sculptors in here? Ever made a statue that looked like something real?
Yeah, I made a Minerva.
You made a Minerva? On purpose?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's pretty good. See, I've tried, the most I could do is I could make a nose that looked real, but the rest of the face, it was like SpongeBob SquarePants with a big Italian nose. What does the gospel have to do with art? I mean, we're here at a Bible retreat, and here I'm talking about acting and sculpting and painting. Here's the main thing, the main point that I want to impress on your hearts as far as what the gospel itself has to do with art. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. That's part of what's called the Shema, which is the Hebrew, the first part of that says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And then it goes on to say, and teach your children all of these commandments. To teach the next generation about how to feel, how to think clearly, how to express not only their emotions, but to express wisdom, knowledge, discernment, understanding. In the Bible, who can give me some examples of art in the Bible itself? Throughout history, there have been lots of paintings related to the Bible. And as a matter of fact, I'll show you a couple. This is some art. Who can identify this one right up here?
Michelangelo.
Michelangelo in where? Where is that? The Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. This is another Michelangelo. This painting, this kind of realistic-looking dark painting there. That's this is, what's his full name here? The Michelangelo that everybody knows about at the Sistine Chapel is Michelangelo di Lodovici Buonarroti Simoni. That's his full name.
Nice.
Or as his friends called him, Mickey the Bomb. The other guy in the dark picture there, his name is Michelangelo Caravaggio. And he was a painter. Very similar in a sense, but he didn't do the types of paintings that the other Michelangelo did. He did photorealistic paintings about 300 years before photography was invented. His paintings are some of the coolest thing. I mean, you could look at paintings that he did of like a scene with Jesus and the apostles in it, and there'll be a wine bottle sitting there, and on that wine bottle there's a reflection, and you can see all the people sitting around the table in this little bitty reflection off of this one extra surface that's inside the picture. Really good stuff. The other two are from unknown artists. This one is just a stained glass window in a church somewhere, I'm not sure where. I just copied it off of Google Images. This one is from the catacombs underneath the city of Rome, back about 400 AD when the Christian church was illegal in Rome. And the people were having to meet in the catacombs, which included areas that were the burial system. They were basically meeting in graveyards and sewers in order to escape going to prison for their beliefs. And they would decorate the inside of the catacombs with paintings like this one of Mary and Jesus. So that's one form of classical art in images. And then we have modern art in images. The Abba Father thing, that's just some graphic that I found on Google that I used in a sermon about Abba Father, God our Daddy. The thing that's really interesting about that stuff is the fact that we use art to be able to express even a simple phrase or a simple thing. When I'm doing my messages on Sunday at church, I usually use PowerPoint like this, and I'll have graphical images that evoke some type of emotion or knowledge or understanding related to what I'm doing, so that I can be able to portray a multi-dimensional facet of the gospel, rather than simply standing in front and preaching, which is what I've done for 20 years before PowerPoint came along, to be able to use imagery in addition to that. Thing is, I can't draw something like that. I mean, I know it's done, you know, they type it out with fonts and someone goes in and modifies the fonts a little bit. To be able to make computer fonts is an actual artistic skill. It's a type of programming that requires knowledge and skill and the ability to do that. That's a type of graphic art in the modern age that didn't exist even 30 years ago. And of course, this other painting here, I don't know if you can see it very well. Anyone know who this is from? Cinderella. Nope. No, it's not from a movie. It's a painting. Actually, I have this portrait in my house, or this canvas in my house. Yeah. This is from an artist named Thomas Kincaid. He recently died, but up until he died, he was called the painter of light. And he specialized in drawing forests and houses and wooded scenes that have light shining out from inside of them. He was a very devout Christian, and what he wanted to do was to be able to paint the peacefulness that God gives him to feel inside of him. And he created that through the art that he does, through this modern art. So that's graphical images in art is part of art. Another thing in art is literature. Anyone know who these two guys are?
Ronald Reagan.
C.S. Lewis and
Dr.
Tolkien.
Tolkien, that's right. Guy on the left, C.S. Lewis, author of what books?
The Narnia.
Narnia, that's right. He also wrote many, many other books. The Narnia series made him popular, but that wasn't towards the end. That was towards the end of his life. In the 1930s and 40s, he wrote a book called the Interplanetary series, or a trilogy of books called the planetary series about a guy who gets unexpectedly thrust off the Earth, and in one book he goes to Mars, in another book he goes to Venus, and the third book I haven't read it yet, so I don't know where it is. But it's very interesting, very deep book. The other guy, J.R. Tolkien, wrote what?
Harry Potter.
Not Harry Potter. Not Harry Potter. He wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, as well as many other books along his life, but that's the primary one that made him famous. Both of those guys, C.S. Lewis died in 1964, I think it was, and Tolkien died in 1972 or 73. Yet their books are still top bestsellers, top 10 bestsellers in the entire world, 40, 50 years after their death. They wrote some pretty impactful stuff. Here's something that they both said about the work that they did. C.S. Lewis, and by the way, neither one of them, in the books that they're most famous for, neither one of those sets of books were specifically Christian literature. They were, at most, allegory, which, anyone know what allegory means? An allegory is drawing something that's an example of something else, or that kind of alludes to something else. For instance, in the Narnia series, who is the main character in the Narnia series? Aslan the lion. What did Aslan represent? God, Jesus, through the sacrifice. He came, he created everything, he left, he came back later to save everyone. And that's what C.S. Lewis was about. Here's an interesting thing that C.S. Lewis says. He says, an argument for Christian principles or truth might hold people's attention as they are reading it or hearing it. But the moment they have gone away from the lecture hall or laid down the article, they are plunged back into a world where the opposite position is taken for granted. Every newspaper, film, novel, and textbook undermines our works. And he was saying this in reference to specifically Christian books. If you go to a Christian bookstore and you're looking at books written by and for Christians, the entire audience, the entire clientele of that store is going to be one group of people that mostly all already believes what's in those books. And so the audience is going to be very limited. And what they read in those books, as entertaining as they may be, any of you guys read fiction? Read novels? What kind of fiction do you read? Harry Potter stuff, okay? Fantasy, science fiction type stuff. Anyone else?
I read comics.
Comics, okay? That's a form of literature. Comics? Harry Potter?
I read sci-fi.
Same as the other person.
Science fiction.
Oh, science fiction, okay. Science fiction, comic books, fantasy, all of those different kinds of things. You can go to a Christian bookstore and get specific books written in those genres that have a completely Christian worldview, but are devoted mainly specifically to Christians. And those books are most of the time not going to be available in non-Christian bookstores, in secular standard bookstores. Some of them will be out there, most not, just because of who the publisher is. What C.S. Lewis says is this: what we want is not more little books about Christianity, but more little books by Christians on other subjects with their Christianity latent. In other words, you write your worldview. You as a Christian, if you want to create art, if you want to be a writer or be an artist, a painter, a sculptor, whatever it may be, you don't necessarily have to take your stories and make them specifically a Christian story, where the person reads it and they get the full gospel presentation as soon as they open the book, or even at some point through the book, they get the full gospel presentation. That's not necessary to be able to reach people. What will work, what will be able to reach out there, is to have a Christian worldview encompassed in the general body of your work. So when people read it, for instance, these are my books. I'm an author. Oh, by the way, I should back up a little bit and introduce myself to some of you who don't know me. My name is Basil Sands. I've been an actor, both in an amateur sense and a professional sense, since I was about 12 years old. I've been on a lot of stage productions when I was younger. I did stand-up comedy in my late teens, early 20s. I did community theater and a lot of church theater since my 20s, where I enacted individual characters from the Bible or from history. And a lot of the kids here have seen me do that in our church organization among the Korean churches. My wife is Korean, and I'm actually Korean. I just look Caucasian. Been with my wife longer than I was with my parents, and I've eaten kimchi almost every meal for the last 25 years, so I think it qualifies me. I also, starting in 2006, I started writing novels, and I narrate audiobooks for part of my living today, where I record books into MP3s, and they go up on audible.com and Amazon, and wherever else the publishers want to put them. So these are some of the books that I've written. These are the 4 novels that I've written. And in these books, 2 things that went through my mind as I was writing. One of them was anything that I write, the kids and adults in my church are going to read it. So therefore, I need to make sure that I write something that I would want the elder of my church, who pays my salary for being the Sunday school director, I would want him to be able to read it without wanting to fire me immediately after, right? So there are things that are going to be missing from these books. Gratuitous sex, not in there. F-bombs, not in there. Is there foul language in there? There is some, because that's the way bad guys talk in real life. There's other things in there, though, that go along with the story. For instance, this book is about a terrorist, the advent of World War III starting in Iran. The main theme of the book is stopping these guys with a nuclear bomb from attacking the U.S. forces in Pakistan. A sub-theme of the book is the main female character has been horribly persecuted for her Christianity in Iran, to the point where she was tortured and raped and all this, and she's dedicated to stopping that kind of thing from happening to other people. So that's a major, major theme in the book. This book happens up in Fairbanks. It's titled 65 Below, and it's about a retired Marines master gunnery sergeant who discovers a terrorist plot to let a bioweapon out in the Fairbanks area. And while he's chasing after them, he runs back into his former fiancée, who had left him when she thought he was dead at one point in his career. She got pregnant from another guy, got married, the guy ended up divorcing her, and a month later, the main character, Marcus, shows up and he's still alive, and now she's unable to talk to him because at the time that he came back to life, she was pregnant and married to this other guy. And one of the primary themes of this book, in addition to killing the bad guys and never giving up, is also sexual chastity. Because the main character holds himself for this one woman, and if he can't have her, he's not going to have any. And that's what that book's about. The soldiers and a guy with a mask and North Korean flag. You guys can check these, come and look at them later. This book is about a pastor who's a retired Marine Force Recon sniper, who, unknown to his congregation, after he got out of the regular Marines and was a reservist and became a full-time pastor, he was still killing bad guys. The government would call him up and he would still do his job, and his church didn't know. And so this book is about that kind of dichotomy, kind of like what King David felt, of being a man of God and being a warrior at the same time. And he has to deal with a lot of issues. And that this book is the summary, or the sequel to these 2 books put together. Many of the same main characters, and one character who's in most of my books, all but one of them, named Karzai, who's a kind of psychopathic serial CIA spy / hitman. And he deals with a lot of psychological issues and spiritual issues as well. So, all of those, while none of them are explicitly Christian, all of them have a Christian worldview that I try to portray in the story. So that when people read it, they're like, oh, not all Marine gunnery sergeants have to, use the F word every other syllable, and not all of them have to sleep around with all kinds of people, and not all of them have to, act this stereotypical way, and not all pastors have to be, the stereotypical pastor who lets people push them around, the way Hollywood would portray it. But when people read the book, it's unmistakable the worldview that they get. Likewise with these guys. With C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, both of them had they had these huge worlds that they created in their fiction, and they were able to communicate their own Christian worldview. Both very devout Christians. C.S. Lewis was a devout Anglican Christian from Britain, J.R.R. Tolkien, also from Britain, a devout Catholic. And both of them, through their books, you can see the Christian allegory, especially in C.S. Lewis's books. It's very, if your eyes are open, you can see it very easily. More recent authors, if you guys like to read any kind of horror or fantasy fiction, these two guys, Frank Peretti, man, his books, this is the second of his original first series, Piercing the Darkness. The one before it was called This Present Darkness. If you want to learn something about what spiritual warfare may really be like, I highly recommend. Those books have been bestsellers since, I think they came out in the early 90s. They've been bestsellers ever since. Powerful, powerful work on spiritual warfare. And that's what he writes about. From a very Christian sense, and his books are more openly Christian. Ted Decker, on the other hand, he writes from a very strong Christian worldview, but his books are not explicitly Christian. Matter of fact, Christian bookstores looked at his and said to his the same thing that they said to mine when I tried to publish them. No, thank you. And sent us away. Because the books, in my case, the Christian message wasn't direct enough and the violence was realistic. In his case, the violence, that he writes horror novels, or horror science fiction, but with a Christian worldview that may seem like, how can you have a Christian horror story? And some of his books, by the way, 3 and the one in the middle, House, which is co-authored by both these guys, are both being made into movies. And pretty intense stories if you like horror novels and that kind of fiction. But they write from a perspective that is a Christian perspective. So that portrays the image. And that's one of the key things that we want to be able to do in the art that we share with people, is to not just draw our pictures for the sake of drawing our pictures, or write our stories for the sake of writing our stories. Have any of you guys ever been to a poetry jam or seen a poetry? Now, someone yesterday in the class, they said, yeah, I did something like that in the 5th grade. Well, there's a big difference between a 5th grade poetry jam and one where you go to, like, a nightclub or something and they're doing a poetry jam. The 5th graders have good poetry usually. Go to the nightclub stuff or the stuff that goes on at UAA, and it's usually filthy, pornographic, violent, hate my mother, hate my father, gonna rape my sister stuff. It's like, gross, why you gotta do that? Why do you gotta portray all the dark side only? And is that what's really fully in your heart? Which for many of those people, apparently it is. I went to a writers conference down in Homer several years ago, where we were, it was a series of workshops for writers, and there was some of the writers were already professionals, some of them were just kind of learning to write. And one of the activities that they had a bunch of us do was to take the Goldilocks story, and they gave us 10 or 15 minutes to rewrite it in a different format. And, I wrote mine as, Goldilocks got kicked out of her house by her parents, and she's wandering through the streets. It's rainy and miserable, and she's starving, and she sees the door cracked open, and she goes in to eat the stuff, knows what kind of bears may be in there, or something like that. And I left it at that. The next guy gets up and reads his story, and it's all about, Mary, or Goldilocks goes in there, and the bears rape her. What? Why do you have to write like that? What does that? And then the next person wrote something about incest. And the next person wrote some dirty story about what. All of them had nothing but like this filth. That was what was coming out of their hearts. That's what they think. They consider it to be art, but is it really art? Is it really legitimate expression? What's the purpose, the function behind expression that just expresses rage or anger or fear or hatred? That kind of expression, while it may put out what a person feels, is that the portrayal of you that you want to be. See, art isn't necessarily the expression of what is. Art, in my opinion, should be the expression of what should be, what could be. And in American art in the last 100 years, we've seen this huge degradation of quality. 100 years ago, people who wrote novels, they really wrote well. They studied well, they wrote solid stories that either made you feel good or made you think really deep. Nowadays, the books that go out there, more and more people have quit reading books in general, and they're just reading graphic novels. Comic books for adults is one of the hugest sellers out there. which, you know, to many people would be like, why would so many adults be buying comic books? And is there anything wrong with comic books? Not necessarily, but look at most of them. Look at the covers of most of them. Most of them, they're basically pornography, hand-drawn instead of photographs. That's the way the pictures end up being. That's the way the stories end up being. So we have to consider all these things in our own artistic endeavors. Now, the rest of the time I want to focus on performance arts, because I know that that's a thing that a lot of people really picture as being the arts, in addition to drawing, writing, painting, other stuff. Can a Christian be involved in the performance arts? And by performance arts, I mean Hollywood, Broadway, television, those kinds of things. The youth pastor, who was the youth pastor of our church before I became that several years ago, a guy named Jimmy E., he actually left full-time ministry to go into acting. He moved to British Columbia, and he's a Christian guy who's an actor. Probably all of you have seen him, although, you know, only the handful of kids from my church that were there when he was there would recognize him. But he's been in all kinds of Wendy's commercials, Nike commercials, Burger King, insurance companies. His face is in magazines and TV ads all over the U.S. and Canada. But he gets to bring his Christian influence into the performing arts. Many years ago, in, you know, this may seem like decades, well, it was decades ago, huh? 1986, when I graduated from high school, I was seriously considering, and my art and drama teacher was recommending for me to go into professional acting, to go to acting school and be able to get into it and do that for a living. And I know it's hard to picture with my body shape at the moment, but at the time I was really interested in like Broadway musicals, dance kind of stuff. At the time I opted not to jump right into it, because as I started to meet more and more people that were involved in it, I found out that I would be maybe the only straight guy on the entire cast. And I was like, I don't know if I want to surround myself with, you know, gay people everywhere, basically. And all the women who weren't gay were flirting around with all the guys who weren't gay. And so it'd be really hard to make a solid relationship, to make a family, which is one of the main things that I wanted. So I backed out of that, and rather than get into traditional acting, I ended up going my own route just as a solo actor. That way I could choose what I wanted to do and take control of my own scripts and things like that. Never got rich at it. Matter of fact, I seldom ever made any money at it. But it gave me a lot of learning over these past 25 years of being able to look out and see what options are available and what the world can, how people can receive advantages from people who are acting with a Christian worldview. There are some Christians out there in the world of acting who have really made it well for themselves and managed to hold on to their faith. And I'm going to go through just a couple pictures of him here. You guys recognize this guy? We've never seen him in a movie?
James Bond.
James Bond, that's right. Goldfinger, he played the character Jaws. And he played in several other James Bond movies over the years, as well as in general playing the big mean giant in several other non-James Bond movies.
Was he in, Princess Bride?
No, that was Andre the Giant.
Oh, okay.
Andre the Giant was in Princess Bride. He was in, the last movie he was in was, what's it called? Not Spies Like Us, Steve Carell. The spy movie. Get Smart? Get Smart.
Oh.
He played the bad guy giant in that one too. Except now he's like in his 60s, so they had to do a lot of makeup on him.
Oh, that was a giant?
Uh-huh.
He didn't even look like him.
I think it was the same guy. Pretty sure. I mean, this picture was taken in the 1960s when he was like 24 years old. Now he's like 70 years old. So. Richard Keel is his name. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is not only a Christian actor, he's a preacher, a teacher. He writes books. He's a news reporter. He does a lot of stuff. Very devout Christian guy. Very upright, very strong in his morals. And if you look back at most of his movies, especially as he got older, the vast majority of his movies are very clean compared to similar movies put out by other actors even at that same time. Not necessarily non-violent, but not filthy. Denzel Washington. Now here's an interesting thing about Denzel. He is an avowed Christian. He's a Baptist, grew up, born and raised in the church, still very faithful in that. If you've seen some of his movies, though, he does use foul language in quite a lot of his movies. But usually only when he's playing a bad guy. And when he's doing that, he plays the bad guys realistically. That's one of the key things that has been a downside of most Christian-produced movies, is that the characters in the movies come out flat. They come out not seeming like real people, like an idealization of what people should be like a 1950s television show. This is the way the world should look if everything was perfect, but they're not very realistic in the way that it goes. Denzel plays some pretty realistic parts, and you know everyone knows who Denzel Washington is, right?
Yep. I loved the Book of Eli. That was like
Book of Eli. That is an awesome.
So
that I think was my favorite movie of him ever. That was awesome. Here's someone you probably don't know. I would be surprised if you knew it. Have you guys ever watched the TV show ER? It's like an evening soap opera kind of deal in a hospital. Angela Bassett plays a background character in there, a doctor. And she plays in a lot of other television shows, movies, dramas. She does animation voices for like The Simpsons and Meet the Robinsons. She was one of the voices in that movie. She's an actress who makes a full-time living acting, but because of her Christian worldview, because of her strong Christianity, doesn't and probably won't get any major parts. Highly unlikely, because she is a strong, godly Christian woman. And because of that, a lot of times Hollywood shuts the door on actors that express their Christianity. Here's what Angela Bassett had to say about being a Christian actor. Loving God is like my being black. I just am. No one says, you know what, I'm going to be blacker today. Loving God is my culture. It's not something I can put on or take off or show more. You just communicate that in the way that you live your life. Loving God, she doesn't have to go out and shout from the rooftops about her Christianity. The people who shout from the rooftops usually end up getting humiliated. They may be totally sincere, shouting the gospel from the rooftops and drawing people in. 9 times out of 10, they're also going to be put up on a pedestal, and then that pedestal is going to be knocked out, and they're going to be embarrassed because they did something sinful at some point, or maybe even while they were in ministry, was doing something wrong. People, on the other hand, who live your life, like the Bible says, to live your life at peace with everyone as much as possible. Show them by your deeds, show them by your work, show them by how you love other people. And you may not become super famous, but you may become super famous in God's book, which is the more important. James Caviezel. Anyone ever heard of him? What movie is he famous for?
Passion of the Christ.
Passion of the Christ. That, huh?
Is he Jesus?
Yes. He was the guy who played Jesus in the Passion of the Christ. That's him carrying the cross right there. When he took that role, when it was offered to him, he was the primary person that Mel Gibson wanted for the part. He just pictured him and said, you're the guy I want for this. But Gibson said to him, if you take this job, you'll never work in this town again. You take this job, you'll be done in Hollywood for the rest of your life. And Caviezel told him, we all have to embrace our crosses. In other words, he said, this is the part that I was made for. This character, playing Jesus in this movie, was the part that my whole life was pointing in this direction. And, sure enough, since 2006, I believe, or 2003 when that movie came out, James Caviezel has not worked in Hollywood.
Why not?
He auditions, but they're not going to hire him. They're not going to call him, because he represented Christ in a very strong manner. He represented Christ in a very realistic manner. And when people take a religious stance, and he's, since that time, I mean, he goes to churches and he teaches and he gives lectures about, you know, Christ and crucifixion and all, because he had to do a lot of research to learn what happened there. He basically had to go through what Christ went through. without the dying part and without his skin actually being flayed off his body. Yes, Cindy?
Wait, before this movie, was he in like any other big movies?
He was in some others. He was an up-and-coming actor. He was in a movie with one of the big female Latina singers.
Viva La
Lopez.
Queen Latifah.
No, I think it was Jennifer Lopez. No, it wasn't J-Lo. It was,
Viva La Gloria. Viva La Gloria.
no, maybe it was Jennifer Lopez. Who's the one that's on, not America's Got Talent?
American Idol. Little boys. J-Lo.
No, not J-Lo. I think it was, maybe it was Jennifer
It
Lopez.
was J-Lo.
Anyway, she was with one of those, he started a movie with her, and he started in some other movies, and he was like climbing the ladder of success.
Oh, he was in a movie with it was with J-Lo. It was about, he was in it, I remember.
Okay, I saw the picture online, and I just can't remember the title of the movie. But he was in several good movies right before this. When he came to this, though, that was the end of his career. But he was willing to take the hit because this was an expression of his true faith in God to be able to do this movie. Here's another guy you might not think of as a Christian actor, Ving Rhames. He's been in some pretty vulgar, violent movies, but he's also been in some pretty good movies. One movie recently that he did, that he actually wrote and co-produced with someone else, was called Saving God. And I highly, highly recommend this movie. Anyone heard of the movie before? It's like it's a movie that he wrote the script. He couldn't sell it to the regular studios, so he went to a Christian production company, the same people that made the movie Fireproof and the Left Behind series. And they took it and put it together and made this really awesome movie about the son of a pastor's kid, who ends up committing manslaughter, accidentally killing somebody, goes to prison for so many years, comes out 10 or 15 years later, and his father's dead, his mother's dead, his father's church is in ruins, so he decides he's going to rebuild it. He's become a dedicated Christian while he was in prison, and he becomes a pastor. And it's all about him rebuilding this church in this inner city part of I think it's in Detroit or Chicago, one of those cities with major problems. And he's building the whole thing up with the drug dealers all around and all that. Tearjerker of a movie, seriously good movie. Highly recommend it. If you're under 13, check with your parents first, because it is a PG-13 movie, but very, very highly recommended. The person who recommended it to me was Brian Hack, and he thought it was an excellent movie as well, for those of you who know Brian. Now, outside of acting itself, there's other jobs. This guy, Howard Kazanjian, is a producer. He produced those two movies, as well as dozens of others, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars Return of the Jedi. This guy was a producer. What the producer does is the producer creates the final product, hence the word producer, product. The director is a guy who's stand or gal who's on scene shooting the film, giving the directions to the actors, the cameramen, the props, the stuntmen. That's like the ground floor manager is the director. The producer is a person who takes all the footage, puts it all together, cuts it up, edits it, hires it out to different people for special effects, and makes the product that you actually see at the end. The producer's job makes the movie. The acting bits, for instance, the Lord of the Rings movies, The Hobbit that's out now. Anyone seen The Hobbit? Good movie. I thought it was pretty good. Although I heard, did you see it in 3D or? Neither did we. Did you think it was good?
It's fine without 3D.
Yeah. I thought it was fine without 3D. Eric Kay saw it in 3D. He said it made him sick. It was just too weird.
There's a lot of camera motion in that movie, so.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of camera motion, and it was filmed at 40 frames per second instead of 24, which means it was like being in the room with the people.
Hyper-realistic.
Hyper-realistic. You could see the edges of their makeup and the plastic masks they were wearing and stuff. So, anyway, The Hobbit is a 3-movie series. Took about 3 years to film, or to put it together, I should say. All the filming for the movie probably occurred within a 3 or 4 month period for this 9 hours of movie. The filming part was the easy part. Huh? 9 hours total between the 3 movies. And it probably took about 3 or 4 months of total filming work for the actors and everyone. That's why actors can put out several movies a year, because they'll go shoot all their parts for this one. What's that?
I always wondered that.
Yep, they'll shoot this part and then they take off and go shoot another one. And by the time the movie comes out in theater, they've done 6 or 7 other movies already.
Yeah, because Anne Hathaway is like best around another movie and she was just in it as well.
Yep. Yep. And so The Hobbit was all done filming 3 years ago. The producers had to sit down and do all the cutting and the editing and the special effects. And I watched The Hobbit, we watched the whole credits thinking that there would be some Easter egg surprise at the end of the credits, some extra footage to watch. There wasn't. So if you go see The Hobbit, when the credits start, just leave. Because you'll sit there for 20 minutes and be depressed after you've seen about 3,000 names scroll by. That's all the people that the producer works with to actually make the film. This guy, Howard Kazanjian, he's also a devout Christian, and he started an organization called Act One Incorporated, which, and I'll just read their profile here, exists to create a community of Christian professionals for the entertainment industry who are committed to artistry, professionalism, meaning, and prayer, so that through their lives and work, they may be witnesses of Christ and the truth to their fellow artists and the global culture. Pretty intense set of stuff that he's trying to do among this artistic culture that's usually not only non-Christian, but very anti-Christian. And he's building a ground floor ministry inside of it. Likewise, this guy, Ralph Winter, who's also a producer. X-Men, Planet of the Apes, Fantastic Four. He's a producer who made the final product that you guys see when you go to the theater. And he also is a strong Christian. And what he says is it's about integrity. What our journey is how to get close to Christ. And what does it mean to follow Christ? What does it mean to be in a community with other believers and build relationships? It's about character building. That's what the Christian life is all about. As he's making movies like these, and you notice some of these movies, I mean, they have clear-cut good guys and bad guys. The good guys aren't necessarily perfect. They're not necessarily going to make all the right decisions. They get moody like Wolverine, or, kind of show-offy like the flame guy there, and all that stuff. But they've got redemptive value in most of these movies that these guys are putting out. There's a way for people. It's not like a lot of the secular horror movies that are just everybody dies in the end and the bad guy loses. Or the bad guy wins, rather. Finally, Philip Anschutz. Philip Anschutz is an interesting person. He has nothing to do with movies on a professional sense. But he was out looking at movies. He's got several children and a bunch of grandchildren. And he was looking through the movies to take his grandkids to and realized there's nothing out there that I can take my grandkids to other than, Disney cartoons is about it. And even them half the time are pretty suggestive. It's really difficult to find a good family movie that I feel confident I could take my first grade, my 6-year-old grandkids to. So he took his own money and decided he's going to make Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or the Chronicles of Narnia, the whole series. He took his own money as an investment, convinced Disney to buy the rights and to do the actual work, and he subsidized the vast majority of it. And got them to do, the funny thing is, Disney is a very anti-Christian company. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but they are big time, want nothing to do with the Christian walk. And very pro-homosexual, very pro-liberal stuff, very anti-God, anti-Bible. He got them, the funny thing is, he got them to make The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, before they realized, that's the 3 of the books from the Chronicles of Narnia, before they realized that it was a series of Christian books. Which is the reason there will not be the silver chair, or the ones after it. Because when Disney found out that this is a series of Christian books, they shelved it. So we're not going to make the rest of these.
Wait, what did he do? What does he do for a living?
He's a multi-billionaire. He owns a lot of companies. So, he started off just as a normal guy, had this business, built it up, sold it for more money, bought 2 businesses, built it and sold it until he became a multi-billionaire with his fingers in a lot of things. But he's also a devout Christian, lives down in Colorado, in Denver near the Focus on the Family place. Which brings me another idea of Christian artists. Any of you guys ever listen to Adventures in Odyssey? You guys familiar with that show at all? Oh man. You guys gotta listen to Adventures in Odyssey. It's on at 3:30 every weekday on 89.3. It's on the radio. It's a radio drama. It's hilarious quite often. Usually it's hilarious, sometimes it's really serious. It's like a sitcom on the radio, one of the last of its kind. And it comes out of the same town. This guy, Philip Anschutz, also financed the movie Amazing Grace, about the song, Amazing Grace, and where it came from. The fact that the guy who wrote that song was actually a slave trader and later became a Christian and renounced his ways of capturing and selling human beings. And outstanding movie. I highly recommend it. These are some examples of people who are Christians in the performing arts and the literary arts and the graphical arts. You guys, any of you who are interested in doing something with your own creativity, the doors are wide open for this whole world of creativity. But one of the key things, these movies that everybody liked, like Narnia, like the Lord of the Rings stuff, is quality. Being able to produce quality is what we really, really need out there in the artistic world. Being dedicated to God, loving God, but not settling for junk and hoping that the audience will accept it because it's got a Christian message, and so we can at least convince all the churches to buy this really poorly made movie. There's a lot of, there are several new Christian studios that have cropped up over the years that are making pretty good quality stuff and improving. Facing the Giants, football movie that came out a couple years ago. That was actually made in a church in Georgia with all volunteer actors. Nobody got paid for anything. And they made extremely low budget, and it actually turned out to be one of the top movies of that year, one of the top independent films of that year. Because they put quality into it, even though they didn't have the resources of Hollywood. What does all this have to do with us being in the arts and with the arts in general? How can we as Christians be involved in the professional expression of the arts? Listen to what Paul says in Romans chapter 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Can a Christian be part of the professional art world in any of the various formats? Yes. First, conform your mind to the pattern of God. First, put yourself in submission to God. And then he will open those doors for you that will enable you to get in there and do the work that he created you to do. If he made you to be an actor, if he made you to be a painter, a singer, a dancer, whatever it is, use that skill to serve him. How can you test whether or not that skill is being used for God? A person wants to be a dancer. They can get jobs in Broadway. It's hard to break into it. Maybe they can get jobs in Las Vegas. It's a lot easier to get in there in some places. Being one of those dancers in some of the big clubs where the girls are wearing tiny bikini-like clothes and feathers all over their heads. Yeah, maybe you can get into that. But is that going to be a Christian ministry? Is that going to be an example of godly womanhood, godly manhood? Should a Christian dancer be willing to become a stripper in order to make good money, pay their way to go on to bigger and better things? No. Should a comedian, a person who wants to be a stand-up comic, go out there and because dirty jokes sell, should they get up on stage and tell all kinds of vulgar jokes and be nasty and say all kinds of swear words on stage just for the sake of a paycheck? No. Because you will lose your Christian testimony in so doing. You will lose your ability to do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There are many, many wide open opportunities for all of us. Can a Christian work in a blatantly non-Christian environment? Yes, because the whole world around us is a blatantly non-Christian environment. I wrote you in my letter, says Paul, not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning people of this world who are immoral or greedy or swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. In other words, we can and should be able to work out there in the world and do the kind of things that God wants us to do. Our business is to present that which is timeless to the particular language of our own age. And that's what being in the arts as a Christian is all about. That having been said, we got just a few minutes left. I'm going to